This is Mark with Rollout Docks. Today we're going to look at our deluxe 32-foot ridgeline dock. It comes with poles every 8 feet, longer poles if you need them, 2 axles, one in the first section, one in the second section, a bench, a ladder, and a stabilizing kit with an 8-foot by 8-foot patio, 32 feet overall length, and then we divide it into 2 16-foot sections to make it much easier to take in and out. Today we're going to show you how to assemble our deluxe version of the Ridgeline dock. To start with, we'll show you what tools you're going to need. You'll need a tape measure, a scissors, 3/4 inch wrench or 19 millimeter will work, 1/2 inch 9/16 wrench, a deep 3/4 or 19 millimeter socket. You also want a shallow one, 5/8 socket, 9/16 socket, and a 1/2 inch socket. And then you also need your ratchet, something to mark it with, screwdriver, and a saw. Skill saw works the best, but there's other saws out there, a hand saw, small coping saw would work too. The deluxe dock comes with a number of extra items. One of them is the bench, and we'll show you how to put that together right now. To put the bench together, we'll have the bottom and the back. They're the same piece, and then we've got the end panels. You just slide that on. You'll have 9 bolts that are identical. Bring that in, put a nut behind it, and on all of these, you want to just put the nuts on just finger tight. The key to putting anything together like this is to put all the bolts and nuts in loosely to begin with. That way you can get everything to line up together. Slide those on the top and insert them in the armrest. And slide the nuts on and then tighten. Once you have everything on, once you have it all together, then you come back and tighten all the nuts. Careful not to tighten them too much. You can actually crush the aluminum tubing if you get a little too carried away. To tighten them up, you just need a 1/2 inch wrench or ratchet. The standard dock is a little different than what we normally sell here. We have our deluxe version. It's only available from Rollout Docks, and it comes with lots of extras. When I get it all put together, we'll show you what you all get with it. To get started, what we're going to do is take these bolts out on the side. These are the bolts we use to put it together. Now that we've got all the bolts out, we're going to take the decking off. It just lifts off and we'll set it to the side. Each section is 4 feet wide and 8 foot long. The middle of each section is this plate right here. The middle of the plate is the middle of the section. Right here is the pocket. That's where the poles will go. It's slightly offset. On the first 16 foot of the deluxe dock, I like to have the pocket in front of the middle, and on the back, I like to have the pocket slightly behind. If you get it off, it's not a big deal. That's just kind of the way I prefer to have it. This will be our first 16 feet. We'll have the dock wheels up front and 2 poles on the back. Now we're going to install the decking, but before we put that on, we want to loosen these bolts right here. These are the set screws that hold the poles in place. And once you have the decking on, they're a little bit harder to get to. So it's easier if you go ahead and loosen those up to begin with. And you want to get them so you can't see the bolt in the pocket anymore. Because if the bolt is in the pocket, the pole will catch on it, it'll bind, and it'll be hard to adjust. All you got to do is look down the pocket and just keep on backing out the bolt till you can't see it anymore. The decking comes in 4 foot by 4 foot sections. There's a front and a back. There's a little logo here with kind of an arrow on it. That points up. That should point towards the lake. And on each end, there's these interlocking tabs, and we'll show you how to lock those together. Now we're going to put the decking on, and the decking will need holes in it, either 2 holes in the front or 2 holes in the back. And the way we do that is we set the decking on and get it so it's even with the end of the dock. And then we'll look, and you can see where the poles go. We'll take a black marker and actually mark where the poles go so we can cut that out ahead of time. And when we do that, we don't need any side to side. These are really tight when it comes side to side, but we will need some adjustment forward to backward. So I like to cut the holes about a 1/2 inch long on both ends. Now what we're going to do is install the decking on the dock. What we have to do though is cut holes in the decking to allow the poles to go through the decking and into the pocket. Doing this now will save a lot of time and hassle later. Okay, now we just slide the decking over the hole and make sure it's in the right spot. And we'll take our marker and mark where the hole is. We want to use about a 1/2 inch extra on the front and the back in order to give us the adjustability we need when we get the dock together. We've got the holes cut for the first section. Now we're going to put the next one on. And what they do is they interlock together, and the best way to do that is to get them up at a little bit of an angle and just wiggle them, and they will lock together. And you set them down, and then you grab the next panel and put that on. Now that we've got the decking on, we're ready to put the posts and axle together. Careful of the water. Now what we're going to do is install the poles that are going to be the closest to the shore. All we do is go through the decking and through the pocket, and if that bolt is in there at all, it will bind rather quickly. We just bring it all the way down to the ground, and then we'll do the same thing to the other side. Just installing the pole on the other side. We'll need to have this up a little bit, so we placed a sawhorse at the end of the dock. The dock will come with different size poles depending on your needs. Most of the time we'll use 6-foot poles closest to the shore and 6-foot poles going onto the axle in the front of the first section. They should slide in nice and easily. The dock comes with pads, and we'll need to remove them before we put the poles in, and then place them on the bottom of the pole. They simply come off just with the turn of a wrench or ratchet. Loosen them up and they just slide right off. To install the pads, we want the bolt all the way out. Place the pad on the pole, making sure the pole is touching the bottom of the pad. And then tighten that up by hand and making sure the pole stays in contact with the pad, we tighten that up. Be careful not to over tighten. If you over tighten it, you could actually push the nut right through the aluminum. Once we get the pads on, what we want to do is take the set screw and tighten that up so when we lift up the other part of the dock, it doesn't fall down and we can remove the sawhorse without fear of the dock falling down. When you tighten these up, you don't need to go an extreme amount, but you need to get them really snug. Now we're going to install the pole going down into the axle. Most of the time the axle will come pre-assembled. But all we do is we grab the pole, slide it down through the pocket, making sure the set screw is loose. And then we come down and go right into the pocket that's attached to the axle. When you do that, we want to make sure the pole is touching the axle and not just sitting on the set screw. So we already pre-tightened the set screw going onto the axle. Now what we'll do is tighten up the bolt going to the pole. When we do that, we want to make sure this pole is as straight as possible. If it's not, if it goes up at an angle at all, when you try and adjust the dock, the pole and the pocket will hit each other and they'll start to bind and it'll make it difficult to adjust the dock up and down. So when you tighten this set screw against the pole, see if there's a small gap of about 1/16 of an inch on both sides and take a look at it and see if it's going up into the pocket nice and straight. Now we're going to put the pole onto the axle. We place it through the decking, through the pocket. The axle bracket that holds the pole onto the axle. When we do that, we want to make sure the pole is touching the axle and going down as absolutely straight as possible with a small gap of about 1/16 of an inch on both sides. That way we can ensure that the axle is going straight up and down. And that's very important. If it doesn't, the dock will bind as it goes up and down. Then what we do is we make sure we have the wheel as tight as possible. Then what we do is make sure that we have the wheel against the axle bracket as tightly as possible with the spacer placed between the wheel and the wheel keeper. Once we have the axle attached, we tighten up the set screw. Now the height is not very important to begin with because when we run the dock in, we have to match the first section up with the second section, and they'll never be perfect, so we just need to get close to begin with. Now that we've got the first section together, 16 feet, this is the shore end, that'll be the lake end, one person could easily move it around, no problem. Now that we've got the first section together, we're going to put the second section together. This will be the section that's out in the lake. It includes a patio section at the end, so at the end of your dock it'll be 8 foot by 8 foot. Now these are two separate sections, 4 foot by 8 foot. You can use the patio section on either the left or the right. It's your choice, it doesn't make a difference. Now we're going to go ahead and bolt them together with 2 bolts on both ends and 2 bolts in the middle. In the corner here, where we're bolting the 2 sections together, most of the time the bench goes here. So you want to make sure you run the bolt through on the left-hand side and the nut and the washer on the right-hand side. That'll prevent any interference when you go to put the bench on. Otherwise the bolts will tend to hit each other. Now what we're going to do is set the decking on the section that goes farthest out in the lake with the patio, and we'll cut the holes in it just like we did on the first section. Now that we've got the patio section all bolted together, we put the decking on it, cut the holes in the decking for the poles. We're going to put the poles in the back of it. Once we get the poles on, we'll put the pads on the bottom of the poles. Now we're going to go ahead and put the axle together, remove the wheel keeper, the spacer, and the axle bracket. The wheel keeper will go on first, followed by the spacer. Then we'll put the wheel on. The wheel is concave on one side and then extends out on the other side. We want to put the wheel on so the part that extends out is facing towards the outside. Once we get that on, we'll put the axle bracket on, and we want 7/8 of an inch from the axle bracket to the end of the axle. And we can go ahead and tighten this up now. We want to make sure this nut that's going to hold the pole is all the way out. Otherwise, it will bind on the pole when we slide the pole in. Once we have that done, we can tighten this whole assembly up. We want to get the wheel as tight against the axle bracket as we can. The less play we have in the wheel, the more stable the dock will be. On this side, we've assembled everything the same way. We'll slide the axle bracket on, and we're going to leave it loose so we can get the poles lined up when we drop them through. Then we'll tighten up the axle bracket. I think it's going to be tall enough, yeah. Barely. We've put the pole in on the other side. Now this is the side where we haven't tightened up the axle bracket yet. We'll drop the pole down, align it with the axle bracket, making sure it touches the axle and doesn't get caught on the bolt. Once we've got the pole in there, we can tighten these up, making sure the pole is as level and straight as possible. The more level you can get this pole, the easier the dock will be to raise up and down. If it's tilted to the left or right at all, it'll tend to bind as you raise the dock up and down. I like to just set the pole in there and jiggle it around, make sure it's as centered as possible, and then go ahead and tighten up the nuts. Once we drop the pole down into the axle bracket, I like to wiggle it a little bit, make sure it's sitting in there nice and straight, and then we can go ahead and tighten those up. Once we have the axle bracket on and tightened up, we'll want to go underneath and push the spacer and the wheel keeper tight up against the wheel and tighten those up. One of the ways you can adjust the dock up and down, even with one person, is by using straps, or I've got come-alongs on here. Make sure you don't just hook onto this, but use some type of strap to go around it. If you use a hook or something, you could potentially bend the dock. Then I put the hook on the top and just tighten it up until it just barely starts to raise. And you'll want to do the same thing to the other side, making sure you raise both sides equally at the same time. If you don't, it will bind. When you're raising it up, they do tend to bind sometimes. If they do, just give it a little shake, and that'll loosen up, and then you can continue raising it up. Sometimes when you're raising or lowering it, it will bind, but it'll bind on this bolt. It'll get caught in the hole. Make sure it's nice and loose in there without pulling it all the way out. We want to measure the water depth at the end of the dock, and we'll add to that whatever we think the highest anticipated wave will be. If you're on a small pond, it might only be 6 inches. If you're on a large lake, it might be 2 feet or more. But whatever you think the largest anticipated wave is, that's where we want the bottom of the dock to be. Now we're going to install the stabilizing kit. We'll start with the U-bolt, place it around the pole, and take 2 plates, put those on. Once we have the plates on, we'll put a washer on each side and then a nut on each side. Then we place the bar on the outside of the U-bolt. Put a washer on the outside of that, and then a nut. And we'll let that just hang loose there till we put the center U-bolt on. On the axle, we're going to put the other U-bolt. We're going to place that on, put our 2 plates on, On the axle underneath, we'll put the U-bolt on, and then we'll put the 2 plates on. There'll be a washer on each side, and then a nut on each side. We'll tighten that up till we can get the stabilizer bar on there. Once we have the stabilizer bar on there, we'll take another washer and a nut and place it over that. Then we'll go ahead and put the other stabilizer bar on. Put a washer and a nut on that too. Once we attach the other stabilizer bar to the U-bolt, then we'll attach it to the pole just like we did the first one. It takes a 9/16 open end wrench. Go ahead and tighten the bolts up once you have everything lined up. They'll need to be nice and snug. The plates will bend quite a bit, and that's okay. Once you get the inside bolts tightened, you can tighten the outside bolt holding the stabilizer arm on, and then you'll put the acorn nut on the outside of that. This is what it'll look like when you get done. You have the U-bolt around the pole, 2 plates, a washer on each side, a nut on each side. You'll have the stabilizing bar, and outside of the stabilizing bar you'll have a washer, a nut, and then an acorn nut on each side. Both sides will be identical, and then where it hooks onto the axle, that will go on the same way. The Deluxe dock comes with a stabilizing kit. You get a support that runs from the axle up to the pole. The way we have it designed is you do not have to readjust the stabilizing kit when you raise the dock up and down. After you install the decking, you can either attach it with stainless steel screws or just plastic zip ties.